Paul Doyle travelled into the city to pick up his friend from the LFC parade. When he got to the parade, Doyle was determined to get to where he wanted to get to. He drove up Dale Street. He collided with over 100 people. His vehicle was brought to a stop with 4 people underneath the vehicle. He acted in a manner that was disgraceful. He deliberately drove into the crowd and he intended to cause them serious injury. The dashcam was the key evidence in the case, really. It gave us a view from what Paul Doyle was seeing at the time. It also contained audio, so it gave us what Doyle was saying as he was driving through the vehicle. It showed from his view exactly what he was faced with, the density of the crowd, the amount of people, and really gave us an insight to how horrific that this crime really was. Watching people bounce off his vehicle, go underneath his vehicle, and the sheer terror on victims' faces was really difficult to view during the investigation. Yeah, in my 20 years of police service, this is the most distressing and graphic footage that I have come across. It was really difficult to watch for me and the whole of the investigation team, but it was really important that we did, because we had to tell the story of each individual victim as to what had gone on, and that was the most key piece of evidence really in doing that. Yeah, so Doyle's vehicle was brought to a stop through a combination of factors. Firstly, I would recognise the bravery of the witness, Daniel Barr. Daniel Barr was a member of the public who attended the parade. He jumped into the back of Doyle's vehicle just after it had collided with the ambulance on Water Street. As it was travelling along, he reached forward through the middle of the driver and passenger seat. He put his automatic vehicle into park, which meant that it could no longer drive forward. The second part of the reason it came to a stop is because there was 4 people trapped underneath his vehicle, and it meant that the wheels lost traction with the road. We do have a number of witnesses who tell us that Doyle continued to press the accelerator despite it being in park and people underneath his vehicle, and he was still continuing to drive. So I've no doubt if it wasn't for the actions of Daniel Barr, Doyle would have continued to cause serious injury to people on Water Street that day.
What do you call damage?
Yeah, so we have 134 recorded victims with Merseyside Police, some with really significant injuries, which range from fractures to other broken bones and significant wounds that have been caused. But probably mostly affected, people are mostly affected by the trauma suffered and the psychological injury. We have dealt with those victims throughout the past 7 months, and we've got a real insight into how this has affected them in their daily lives since this event. You know, some people are no longer comfortable in crowds. Some people have disengaged with football and Liverpool Football Club and feel they can no longer go to matches because of what's occurred. Others, including the children, have had real difficulties in social engagement, in continuing with their sports activities or difficulties at school. It's had a significant impact across a wide range of people. It's affected a lot of people who were there that day. I think ultimately that's one for Paul Doyle, and we've not had the chance to obtain an account from him with him pleading guilty at the very last minute. But the prosecution case was always that Doyle was just in an act of rage, that he wanted to get to where he wanted to get to, and he didn't care who was in his way. He was determined to continue driving down Dale Street. He saw it as his road, and no matter who was in his way, he was going to continue to drive. He intentionally drove at people and continued to drive at people even after he knew that people had been hit by his vehicle, been hit off his bonnet and gone underneath his vehicle. During the interview, he gave an account to us which consisted of 3 parts, really. Firstly, he said that he was in fear from the way that some of the supporters were acting towards him. Secondly, he said that somebody had opened the door and produced a knife, and he thought he was going to be slashed. We've spoke to over 1,500 witnesses and viewed countless hours of CCTV, and there's no other mention of a knife. So we believe that was a lie to try and mitigate what he'd done. And finally, Doyle also said that he stopped as soon as he hit the first person that he collided with, which again was clearly untrue. In terms of a defence, he maintained right until the end, really, that it was out of fear and panic, which we would say is clearly untrue and was unsustainable. And I think the weight of evidence against him led to him to finally recognise what he's done and plead guilty to all charges.
The total sentence which I impose upon you is one of 21 years and 6 months imprisonment. It would have been 24 years after trial. This will comprise sentences of 21 years and 6 months on each of the 12 Section 18 grievous bodily harm and wounding offences, sentences of 16 years on each of the attempted Section 18 offences, and sentences of 20 months on each of the offences of affray and dangerous driving. As I have said, each of those sentences will run concurrently, making a total sentence of 21 years and 6 months. You will serve 2/3 of that sentence in custody before you are released on licence. If you fail to abide by the conditions of your licence, you can be returned to serve some or all of the remainder of that sentence. For the offence of dangerous driving, you will also be disqualified from holding or obtaining a licence to drive, and you will be disqualified until you have passed an extended retest. Many people will think that you should never be allowed to drive again, but I must also consider your prospects for rehabilitation. I intend to impose a disqualification from driving that will operate for a further 3 years after your eventual... The footage is truly shocking. It is difficult, if not impossible, to convey in words alone the scene of devastation you caused. It shows you, quite deliberately, accelerating into groups of fans time and time again. You struck people head-on, knocked others onto the bonnet, drove over limbs, crushed prams, and forced those nearby to scatter in terror. You ploughed on, at speed, and over a considerable distance, violently knocking people aside or simply driving over them, person after person after person. You accelerated forwards and backwards repeatedly. Several victims became trapped beneath the vehicle as you continued to move it. Others were thrown into the air or propelled across the ground. It is almost impossible to comprehend how any right-thinking person could act as you did. To drive a vehicle into crowds of pedestrians with such persistence and disregard for human life defies ordinary understanding.